Oops, it's all Bards. Oh, what a mess.
Welcome to the Barbecue, where the cast and creators of Oops All Bards grill each other about the most recent episode. I am your host and game master, Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy, but if you call me anything other than Jill, I'm assuming you're calling me to ask me to vote for your candidate. With me at the table are our bards, at least some of them. Please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Tej Sinha Das, he, him, playing as Cretaceous Thunderthigh, also he, him.
Hi, I'm Ashley Banks, she, her, playing Belle Cernamio, also she, her.
Hi, I'm Ross Curry. I use he, him, and I play Andra Carroll Holt, who also uses he, him.
I'm Bob Killian. I play Kelonian Stumps, both he, him.
And we also are joined by our producer, Nate Runkle, who may or may not drop in and participate in our conversation today. So this episode, we met a new bard. We talked after episode 4 about, unfortunately, Chris Klinecki had to leave the cast. And so I felt that we really still wanted to have a 5th bard at the table. And so I talked to the remaining bards about bringing somebody else on, and the consensus kind of seemed to be as long as it was somebody that you all already knew in real life. And so I turned to our friend Tej, because we all know Tej. Most of us have played D&D with Tej. If we haven't, we've at least acted with Tej. So welcome, Tej, to the cast.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
I'd love to know about your creation of Cretaceous.
Yeah.
Creation.
Yeah.
His Creatio. I'd always had the idea of like a T-Rex character for something. So I actually have the drawing right in front of me. It's, if I just stare at that, I'll probably think of things. So I think 2 out of 3 times I have played like a very gigantic character. I just find that very amusing, but just in terms of them just like plopping down or like trying to sneak somewhere and it's just a big thumping footsteps. I just always found that very amusing. And then I had also just finished watching season 2 of Prehistoric Planet, and I really love their T-Rex model that they used. It's just like it's very graceful, and it's just nice to look at. And so I thought that character would just be really amusing. And then obviously with T-Rexes having like short little arms, which, all right, I'm going to go on a little rant here. People sometimes say that like, oh, but like the arms are actually pretty big relative to humans, and so they'd actually be pretty strong. No, they wouldn't, okay? A T-Rex is like 6-7 tons, and the things it is dealing with are like 4 to 5 tons. Those little tiny arms aren't actually going to be useful for anything in the T-Rex's sphere of life. So anyway, that's just a point that is very sore for me. But yeah, and then I started thinking,
I'm
giving you too much to work with here.
Oh god, I just took 4 points of psychic damage.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and so, but you know, I'm a sucker for conflicting tropes within a character. So obviously, with him being this big, giant, beefy T-Rex with big claws on his feet and giant legs, you would think, oh, must be a barbarian. But instead, Cretaceous wants to be a singer. He's a little theater kid. Pulled a little tiny bit of inspiration from my own life, with not being necessarily 100% supported as being a singer and a musician, but yeah, and then just kind of went from there. You know, what other personality aspects might be relevant to him. I kind of decided on him being a very grumpy character because of all this stuff that he's gone through, and being like from a militaristic background. Also had to kind of do a slight bit of homebrewing for this type of race, I guess. So it's a subset of the lizard folk called the Rex folk. And yeah, I think just one night after you had asked me to be on, I stayed up until like 3 a.m. drawing and like making bullet points of things that I wanted to make about him, because that's how ADHD works. And so yeah, it was really fun to make him as a character.
Yeah, and then we had to kind of think about like how to work him into the story that was already in progress. And when you'd said that like your family had this like more militaristic background, it was like, well, that's great because the next place that I'm planning on everybody being is like that I'm planning on everybody going to is the military base, which is where we're going to be headed in the next episode. And we also we figured out that you were interested in the College of Creation, which is a component of Sluvere College within the Mage and Martial universe, and that's actually the college that Bob's character that Kelonian is in. So, Bob, how did it feel having another bard from your college now?
It was great. I feel like it's fun having somebody that Kelonian jams with, and that we have, something. We have like a history with that. I think was great, and I don't remember who it was. If it was you, Ashley, or somebody who came up with jams and jams and jams.
Somebody started jams and jams, and then I think I added on the other jam.
Yeah, lots of jams, which is great. The thought of the two of us playing music in our pajamas and also eating jam.
It's just every layer of this just adds just like funniness to what it must have looked like to anybody walking past on campus and seeing this. You got this giant, muscly, bulky T-Rex, this little turtle, a little chicken on his shoulder, and they're playing music. And then, of course, the T-Rex is playing this little tiny stringed instrument, and then the turtle is playing an actual guitar, and then we are in pajamas, and then there is jam. And then just like if you were just walking past it, you would probably just be, nope, not gonna ask any questions. Just keep
I think it would make a great picture for all the fan artists out there.
Yes.
and the fun dynamic that I love, that you coming from this militaristic background and then going into the College of Creation and linking up with the pacifist.
Yeah.
was just
Speaking of your instrument, so folks who have just listened to this episode and who are more musically inclined might recognize, but for everybody else at home who does not necessarily have an ear for an instrument that is usually bowed, but it's instead being plucked, Tej came in with his viola. And Tej, tell us a little bit about like the instrument that Cretaceous plays, but also like the way that you are playing it, and then we have to talk about the song.
Oh yes. So Cretaceous plays a string viol, which is, I guess, kind of a made-up instrument, but I had wanted to think of something that sounded, well, I wanted to use my viola, and I didn't want to have to use the bow and make a whole thing out of it. I think that would just be a little bit too difficult, but also, again, with the added humor of him having this instrument with his little tiny arms that... on T-Rexes only have 2 fingers. I decided to give him a 3rd finger for a thumb, just, so he'd be able to exist in a world and be a sentient creature with ability to manipulate his environment. But I had I don't know if I mentioned this in the episode, but there's a whole backstory for him with there was a bard who came for a celebration that happened to be that his parents were invited to, and he went to, and this bard played a string viol and was one of the only people to ever make his parents even like seem to tap their feet or sway to music, and it was just enchanting for him. And so and so that's kind of how I settled on that particular instrument.
Cool. And now we're going to talk about the Eminem parody. When you so for folks at home, we recorded. I mentioned this at the beginning. We recorded Cretaceous' introduction, and it was just Ross and Bob and Tej and Nate and me at the table. Ashley and Ann couldn't be there that night, and Tej was like, "I've got a song. We're going to do a training montage." I was like, okay, great. And I heard the first 2 notes and I knew exactly where we were going. And then we had to do multiple takes because those of us at the table, other than Tej, could not stop laughing. So, Tej, please tell us about the Lose Yourself parody that is part of the training montage that we get.
Yeah, so I cycled through a few songs that I was considering parodying for this. Another was what is it called? The Mulan song.
Opium Man.
You
Yeah.
must be
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
What is the name of the
I
song?
think it's called Be a Man.
It's called Be a Man.
Okay, yeah. Be a Man from Mulan. I was also thinking Eye of the Tiger. There were a couple others in there, but I settled on Lose Yourself because it was relatively easy to play, and there was just a lot of lyrics and cadence that I could match that I felt when you're parodying a song, sometimes it's a little too open-ended, and so having more structure in the song kind of makes it easier to choose the things you're going to say, at least in my opinion. And I did think it would be very funny for him to rap, but also be kind of singing in his little, somewhat operatic voice. And yeah, again, this was another like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I was like, wait, I have an idea. and then I'm just like, plucking a little bit because I don't want to wake up my roommates. And yeah, it just all kind of came together in one night, basically. Yeah.
Amazing. So before we meet Cretaceous in this episode, we actually have to resolve the aftermath of your encounter with Lucinda at the Alcazar. So all of you, except for Cretaceous, are heading back, minus Ruckus. And there's some processing that happens at the beginning with like where you left off with Ruckus is suddenly Ruckus and the other Best Bow having a conversation that you were all able to understand. And at the beginning of the episode, there's a little aside that Bella's like, did we know that he could talk? We thought that like it was just the buttons. There was no idea that Ruckus had this like fully intelligent inner life. So you depart from there. You've said goodbye to Ruckus. You get to just outside of Sovereign House, and you meet Raylan Dawnshout. Raylan. So we're now 4 episodes in to Oops All Bards, and starting in the very first episode, you get this voiceover that occasionally drops in. And it's a voice of kind of a like NPR reporter style, like radio journalist, which seems like it's not part of this world. And so that voice for our listeners, but also for the players at the table who might not know this backstory, when Nate and I started working on the first episode of Oops All Bards, we knew that there needed to be some narration to provide background. And originally I had kind of done this in this like Kate Blanchett in Lord of the Rings, like, but all of them were deceived. And we just like, that doesn't really work because this is not a high fantasy world that we were doing. But we didn't want it to just sound like me and my voice. And so Nate and I were going like, all right, well, what are some other things that I can do? And I have this character that I've kind of created for Mission Rejected, for this other podcast that most of us are involved with. Connie St. Stevens, who's this like NPR reporter. And it was like, I'll just use that voice again. And then it was like, why the hell is there a reporter here in Udvara, like in this world? And so I was thinking like, oh, this is what all of Oops All Bards is actually, is the documentary that is made about the salvation of Udvara after the fact. So none of you know what is happening or what has happened by the end of this campaign, but you have this omniscient narrator who does. Except that the thing is, the narrator is actually really bad at her job also. She's basically a tabloid reporter. So I'd love to know, like, what were you all, having heard this voice before, but not necessarily knowing where it came from, what did you all think about your first encounter with Raylan?
I hope that Raylan does a morning show, so it's like the morning show with Raylan Dawnshout.
Raylan right now she's got the like overnight shift.
Makes sense.
Yeah, she's
the morning show, the 3 a.m. shift.
Yes.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
shouting for the dawn to come.
Yes. She's the person who like nobody really takes her that seriously, but they need to fill the dead air, so they put her on in that time slot. Yeah, so I mean that is plausible, but Raylan also she asks you a couple of questions about your encounter with Lucinda, including whether there was any veracity to the rumors, whether you've found out whether there was any veracity to the rumors that Lucinda and Malveau had secretly been lovers during the autocracy. And And all of you seemed pretty uninterested in talking to Raylin or hearing her out.
I think this is both me, Ross, as a player, but also where Andric was at. Given what had transpired at the stadium, at least I was on high alert, not trusting anyone that someone in the party didn't have a personal connection to. So I'm not, even though I'm not doing College of Whispers, I was not about to divulge information to some rando.
Yeah, Belle, we established that Belle had dealings with her before just because of her sort of public figure nature. And so Belle also was like, I don't believe anything you say. And also, I'm not going to tell you anything because it will be misinterpreted.
And Anne isn't here, but Clarice also, like from her background as a political strategist, kind of tried to step in. And then somehow Keylonian wound up being the spokesperson and spinning without actually meaning to spin, while also forgetting some of the like details of the history of your country. How did that come about that Keylonian felt that he was the one to step up to Raylan's microphone?
Well, Keylonian has a really good charisma score, and I think I hadn't been playing that out as much, and so I was like, oh well, Keylonian would jump in here. But yeah, Bob doesn't know the details of of the world, so that makes it difficult.
Yeah, it made it very funny though, because it was like Clarice sitting back and watching you, the pacifist who doesn't get involved in politics ever, who like honestly probably didn't even know who who all three triarchs were, like spinning this very effectively. It was really fun to watch at the table. And then you all wind up inside of Sovereign House, and you are informed. Well, you informed Thistle that her presence has been requested at the Alcazar as a hostage. But you are also informed that you are going to be accompanying Gideon to Tabort Sava, which we'll find out is where Crutaceo is from. But you're going to be Gideon's bodyguards.
Bodyguards.
Right.
Bodyguards.
So there was a whole brainstorm, and I don't know how much of it is ultimately going to be captured in the episode as it's released to our audience. But there was a whole brainstorm of different names for the bodyguards, and I would love it if you could go through some of them.
This is important because you have to make sometimes you have to make really difficult decisions in D&D, and this was a really difficult decision because somebody I think you suggested bodyguards. And you may have also suggested bodyguards, or somebody suggested bodyguards.
I was kind of on a roll.
And
because Andric wasn't participating because he thought it was all dumb.
Right.
And Clarice wasn't participating because she was like, I want no part of this. So it was really me and you who were like, let's go.
Bodyguards and bodyguards are both so good. I can't choose between them. We went with bodyguards, I think that was the right choice.
I think bodyguards is great from our perspective, and I think in character, bodyguards made more sense.
Yes. But somewhere in an alternate universe, there are bodyguards, and that is also a very wonderful universe.
Yeah. Any D&D campaign winds up like the party winds up having a name for itself. So you all wound up like coming up with the name. Your party, you are the bodyguards. Which was just so perfect. And
whether everybody else agrees to it or not.
Right.
Clarice and Andric are still out on this one.
Well, but Belle had given Clarice the advice of like, trust me, like, if this is the sort of thing where if you don't come up with your own nickname, somebody else is going to come up with a nickname for you.
Yeah.
Which Clarice in her political life should have been a little bit more attuned to. But Belle certainly as a kind of public figure in her own right is very aware of.
And we did not want our tabloid reporter coming up with a name for us.
Yes.
We suggested Bidenomics, but it just didn't catch on.
But it was really fun, and I hope that at least some of that brainstorm makes it to the final cut. We'll see. Getting that, because those were not the only two names that were brainstormed, but getting through all of that.
Yeah, I genuinely don't remember all of the things that we came up with, but there were several.
There were a few.
Yeah.
But that also, I think, speaks to kind of the in one of the games that Ross DMs, we call it the back of table energy, where like the people who are on the farthest point from the table from Ross at the table, there will be sidebar conversations. There will be like some goofing around and things get dropped into our party Discord. And when we're producing a podcast from our D&D game, it's harder to have those conversations. But having those little kind of meandering sidebars that are still captured are a really wonderful way of doing that. And so I'd like to take a break from talking about the plot of the episode and kind of talk to all of you about like any other experiences you've had where the conversation or the rapport between players at the table has influenced something like what you're calling your party or decisions that are being made, that sort of thing, where it's not always the DM driving these decisions.
First off, I think Ashley and I should be commended for our restraint in not going like completely feral as we are wont to do when you put Ashley and me next to each other at a D&D table.
How dare you say
On
these
the far
hurtful
end
but
of the
accurate
table.
things?
On the far end of the table
We
from
are,
the GM.
in fact,
It's
the
all...
kids sitting in the back of the classroom.
Yes, they are the back of table energy.
Yeah.
Like there were a lot, like we had a lot of like knowing glances and nudges, but
Yeah.
we didn't do the like full on conversations.
Yeah, we did okay. We contained ourselves.
I have done a game with some of my family members and a few cousins, siblings, who came to the game with it all sort of set up, where one of them was, his name is Sir Barnaby of Austershire, and he was very like full of himself this night. And the other character was his squire, and the other character was his like bard who would like sing about him.
Amazing.
And
Oh my
it
gosh.
worked so well. They would all sort of like, you know, turn to him like to and he was a very sort of silly character. They all each had their sort of thing, and the fact that they already had the rapport was really fun and funny in the game.
Well, and that was one of the things that was really important to me as we were putting Oops All Bards together, is that everybody here knows each other and has played with each other, because for an all bard party, like I wanted you to feel comfortable being goofy with each other and having some of that energy.
But it's also true that like we could take the same group of people, like, you know, Anna's not here, but we could take the same group of people, put Bob in the DM's chair, shift the rest of us around, and the whole dynamic would be different. Even the same people from game to game are going to have a different dynamic, and that's wonderful.
It's very true.
Except we'll still be troublemakers.
Well, that's why we should be separated, probably.
Yeah, I don't know how you two wound up sitting next to each other, but
I have to sit with my back to a wall because I get anxious when people are moving behind me.
And Ross kind of always
that's
sits there.
that mafia background.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
I mean, I don't know if we want to put this, but one of the reasons that I sat directly across from Jill is, and again, this might not go in, but, you know, because Jill has DM'd a couple one-shots, but this was the first campaign, she knows that I have a very strong sense of the rules and how rules go. So I knew that she was going to be, we had talked about that, like, you might be looking to me for, like, just kind of like little physical cues here and there. So that's why Jill and I are directly across from one another. At least that's why I think.
I thought you just like to look at your beautiful wife.
Or that.
That's the cherry on top. That's the cherry on top.
Cool. So yeah, we got some fun. I mean, all of D&D is improv, but we got this like fun bit of improv brainstorming.
Oh, Bob had to sit over there because he had the guitar.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And Nate was already set up. So really,
Yeah, so we all kind of are where we and
Are where we had
yeah,
to be. Yeah.
Tage
Right,
is where
Tage
he
took
is
over
because that's where
Chris's
Chris
seat.
had been sitting.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny how even like in just home D&D games, everybody kind of has the regular seats that they wind up gravitating toward, and that becomes your seat for
They're not assigned seats, but if you sit in somebody else's, it's going to be weird.
right. Yeah. Yeah, so we got that fun improv with all of you. It really felt like in a lot of ways this episode, everybody was really falling much more into their characters naturally. It didn't feel like there was easing in. How were you feeling now, 5 episodes in to our campaign? And understanding that this is your first episode, Tage, but like, how's everybody feeling about their characters at this point?
I actually wish that we had, or at least that I had tested out the character before coming into recording. Like if we had done
Like a one shot.
a one shot, or even if I just like brought this build to someone else's one shot and like got to grow with it. It takes, in any given D&D, whether you're recording it or not, I found it takes several sessions to really find the groove of a character. So like this is where I really started to feel like, okay, this is where I am coming from with Andric.
Yeah, I feel like it's similar to a lot of like TV series where you're like, yeah, in the first season, they're still sort of figuring out who they are or what they are, or what they're doing. And that's felt the same for me for Keylonian, because I feel like I'm only just sort of starting to realize like some of the skills that he has doesn't sort of match exactly how I've been playing him. I've been playing him as sort of, kind of this, he's like going with the flow, and he's like a little silly, and he is that way, but he has a very high charisma. He has a high wisdom, so he's alert and he knows kind of what's going on, and is usually
chooses
insightful.
not to.
So I guess he chooses not to.
Yeah. I think this is the first episode, with apologies to Cretaceous, where the characters sort of start to mesh together as well. Just sort of that like understanding of what the relationships are, and like who you would turn to to make a joke, or who you would turn to have your back. It takes a little while to get into that.
Yeah.
But from a listener kind of perspective, like it definitely this episode is when it kind of settled in. But I think like last episode, having everybody have that time to be in a room together to just kind of communicate and just work things out is kind of when it started to settle. And then by the time we hit this episode, it was just like all right, we're here, let's move.
Which is interesting because Ashley actually had to join us remotely for recording this episode.
Yes.
Ashley, how was it for you to be on Zoom while everybody else was in the room?
Sad, lonely. I didn't get to play with our podcat. No, it was fine, and you guys were all very kind and attentive to making sure that I was included. But it did feel a little weird, just the natural. I chime in a lot. I'm just that person. And it felt weird to be doing that from far. It somehow felt more rude to chime in from Zoom than it does to just sort of like be here with you all and say an aside.
Yeah.
Well, can we talk about my favorite thing that happened that's not in the episode, which is at one point, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but you were talking and we're all sitting here, and Tage didn't have Zoom volume on, and had no idea, and was just like, "Are you guys okay?"
Yeah. So everyone's just looking at each other, just like nodding knowingly, and I'm just like, "Am I? Did I miss the telepathy thing? What is happening?"
I don't remember what I was saying, but it was like I was talking for a while.
Yeah. And I was just like, okay.
Because of the way the camera
like,
was angled, you didn't know that Ashley was talking.
No, yeah.
Yeah, that was amazing. It was great that we were still able to record, because I was worried that we weren't going to be able to when Ashley was like, "Hi guys, I am sick," and even though I don't think I'm going to get anybody else sick, I am worried about coughing and interrupting the recording. Mm-hmm. So Nate and I scrambling that morning to try and figure out like what is it that we are going to be able to do here. And then it was like, all right, we're going to set up a laptop at the seat that Ashley would normally sit in. And that will be like where Ashley is. And so she'll have the camera, so she'll be able to see all of us and we'll be able to see her. And we've got a separate mic that is going into Zoom versus the mic that is going into everybody else's, like the audio that Nate is recording. And we all had headphones, but we were hearing each other twice. It presented a lot of logistical issues, but I think we all got through it.
I apologize. And also thank you. And also I'm sorry.
We got an episode produced that day.
It happened.
Yeah.
Can I throw a question to the
Please.
DM? Because after the last episode, we talked about what happens when, because this happens in D&D campaigns, when a player departs. And I was just wondering, from a DM perspective, how did you find it trying to integrate a new character into the story?
That's a great question. I think that because because we were doing this for the pod, I worked with Tej, and like you, Ross, also helped, and Nate helped. Like we spent a lot of time kind of thinking about how do we integrate this character into the story. In a normal campaign, it's kind of like you all roll into a tavern and there's like, you know, this adventurer who's just looking for a party to join. And so now you've got a random adventurer in your party. We had to think about, why was Cretaceous not at graduation that day? Like, what are the things that have permitted this? What is everybody's relationship to Cretaceous? How well do you know him? Do you know him at all? Cretaceous is called Gideon, Uncle Gideon. Holy crap, that's what Clarice calls him. Is that okay? So we really put a lot of thought into that like in a normal campaign may or may not necessarily play out that way. Like in another campaign, it might be that you just decide to throw somebody else in. Sometimes, I mean, Ross, in one of our home games, we had like my cousins were in town and we just like dropped them in for a session. And we also had another player who joined that campaign after somebody else had left. So because I knew that we were producing this for an audience, I thought a lot about how to integrate this character in. But that doesn't necessarily mean if you are running a home game and you want to add another player that you have to put that much work into it.
Here, here.
Yeah.
All right. So, the episode ends with all of you kind of converging at the train station. And we're going to be getting on a train in the next episode. So any thoughts or questions about what we're doing next before we wrap this barbecue?
I'm in my head, this world looks like the world from Korra, Last Avatar. If anybody is familiar, where it's like there's trains and there's radio and there's things like that, but it's still very old timey, like, and magic.
Yeah. It's when we started talking about it, and when I was working with Eddie, who did all our illustrations, it was kind of like steampunk but anime, I think is the instruction that I gave him.
It's basically exactly.
So Korra.
Legend of Korra.
Yeah. So like, I didn't want it to be, first of all, I think everybody's just really tired of the steampunk aesthetic. That was so 8 years ago. But I wanted there, like, I knew more than anything that I wanted there to be a train heist in this season. So it's like, okay, well, if steam locomotives exist, what else exists? And we talked in our last behind the scenes episode about how there's HVAC in Sovereign House. There's a ventilation system. We decided, like, okay, well, there's heating, but not air conditioning. And like, what does this mean for refrigeration? And what does this mean? So there's these radios, but they're magical. And we have this kind of weird. I actually have a running list of technology that does and does not exist in the world of Oops All Bards. But steam locomotions definitely exist, and that's where we're heading the next episode.
I like that there's heating and ventilation, but not air conditioning, so they call it HVA. It's like, we gotta fix the HVA.
Yeah. That's we had Clarice in the HVA in episode 3. Or episode
HV
4.
then, right?
Yeah.
It's just the
Great. Any other thoughts before we close out this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I think spinning forward, picking up on, there's, I like having tropes in my tabletop games, and whether you're thinking, or, I think of everything from, to go to another D&D, the Murder on the Rockport Limited arc of the Adventure Zone, or the train heist episode of Firefly, or the beginning of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Like, put adventurers on a train and fun stuff is going to happen.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
I guess we're going to see in our next episode.
You just made me realize that they reused the trains in Indiana Jones because they do it in the new one too.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. Wow.
We also did it in Mission Rejected, so.
Yeah. I had already conceived this before we did that was the finale of the last season of Mission Rejected. So yes, those of you at home who are not listening to Mission Rejected, you should, because there's another train heist in the finale of the most recent season of Mission Rejected, and you'll get to hear a lot of familiar voices there too. So we're going to wrap this barbecue. Again, I have been your host and game master, Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy. On behalf of all of the bards and my producer, Nate, thank you so much for joining us. Join us in 2 weeks for the next episode of Oops All Bards, where we will be getting on that train. And then 2 weeks after that, where we will be getting our next barbecue episode. Thank you all for listening.
Oops All Bards is created, GM'd, and directed by Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy. This episode was produced, edited, and sound designed by Nate Runkle. Oops All Bards stars Ashley Banks as Belle Sternamiel, Ann Coleman as Clarice Sauercloud, Ross Curry as Andra Carohold, Tage Sinha Das as Cretaceous Thunderthigh, and Bob Killian as Colonian Stumps. The Oops All Bards theme song is by Bob Killian, with additional lyrics by Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy. Oops All Bards is executive produced by The Porch Room. We are part of the Porch Room Network on Spreaker Prime. For more information, visit oopsallbards.com. Thanks, and be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Oops All Bards on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcatcher of choice. And follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Oops All Bards. We'll see you next time.
How will it go?
Well, we're sure you can guess.
Oops, it's all bards. Oh, what a mess.
Another quality podcast from the Porch Room.
We doing okay here, guys?
Yeah.
Are you listening to Ashley?
Oh.
Hi.
She just thought that we were all sitting here
just
staring at each other.
Like, are you all hallucinating?
We're going to break Nate today.